This is Talking Mule Deer with your hosts Steve Belinda and Jody Stemler. Talking Mule Deer takes you on a journey to learn more about the Mule Deer Foundation, mule deer and black-tailed deer biology and management, tips and tactics for hunting, conservation issues, and even features some of our corporate and celebrity partners. Now, let's start talking mule deer.
Hey, this is Jody Stemler, and we are talking mule deer from a unique location this week. We are at the North American Wildlife and Natural Resources Conference.
And I'm Steve Belinda, and today we're going to be talking the great state of Nevada. We have Tony Wasley, who's the Executive Director of the Nevada Division of Wildlife. Department of Wildlife. And we have the person who does most of the work on big game in Nevada, Brian Wakeling, who's the Game Division Manager. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you guys sitting down with us. It's a busy conference, so just to give a little bit of a background, the North American Wildlife Conference, Wildlife and Natural Resources Conference is over 100 years old, and it is the primary gathering point for state fish and wildlife agencies, NGOs, federal agencies. So all the state directors are here, are they not, Tony?
Yeah, most of them. Tremendous amount of turnover this year.
There was, yes.
A lot of gubernatorial elections out there, and I think over half of the state wildlife agency directors will be turning over this year. So a lot are here, a lot of new ones, but there are some vacancies right now.
Okay, and the point of the meeting is what happens at a conference like this?
Tremendous amount of communication and coordination, and as you indicated, our federal partners, Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, USGS, Park Service, all of those federal agencies that we work with and coordinate with at varying degrees and various levels around the country are here. The non-governmental organizations, of course, Mule Deer Foundation, but many of our other non-governmental organization partners, including Ducks Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, the Turkey folks, Boone and Crockett, just a tremendous breadth, really a significant gathering of individuals who are engaged in one way or another in conservation around the country and in the provinces as well.
You know, and Tony, this year, I've been coming to these for about 15 years now, and, you know, usually you see the old white guys, all friends of ours, people that look like me and Brian here, you know. You're a little bit younger, so we don't put you in that category yet.
No, he's not. Just kidding.
But do you know, this year I noticed there's a lot more women.
Woohoo!
And a lot more younger folks here. And I know you gave a keynote on relevancy and diversity. Why don't you tell us a little bit what that keynote was about, what's going on in that world? I know you've been working on a working group to try to get, you know, make sure that hunting and conservation stays relevant.
Yeah, it's a somewhat of an emerging field. I mean, it's been on the agenda. It's been one of the topics that has been regularly discussed. You know, there's been a broader and broader recognition of the challenges in the participation levels, you know, around hunting and public approval and support of hunting. And certainly in some states, it's more of a challenge than others. But for us to continue to perhaps ignore it or not try to address it, probably wouldn't end so well. So there is a recognition that society's values towards wildlife are changing in some states, and it's just an effort to acknowledge those changes and develop some strategies and tactics to help people understand about the benefits that hunters and anglers provide to conservation in this country, and not convert everybody into a hunter or an angler, but certainly achieve a broader societal awareness of the benefits of conservation, the importance of conservation.
It seems to all of us who grew up in the outdoors and conservation and hunting, fishing, but just any kind, bird watching, whatever it is, it seems self-evident that conservation is an important goal, an important priority. And we do recognize that the state fish and wildlife agencies are the primary those responsible for conservation, but there's a whole lot of the public that doesn't get that. And unless they understand that, your ability to do good work for wildlife, all species of wildlife, fish, game, non-game, will be challenged in the future. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's really ultimately the problem. Whether we're talking about federal legislation or state legislation, the money to do good things, certainly we've relied disproportionately on the funding that comes from hunters and anglers, but that's less and less sustainable as we look to the future. And in competing at state legislatures and on Capitol Hill, competing with programs for education, health and human services, corrections, those are the big three. If hunting and angling and conservation, if there isn't the awareness, if it doesn't have the relevance that some of those other high-level programs do, it's just going to be more and more difficult to get the laws and the funding that we need to continue to do good work on the ground.
And when you guys do your job, I think a lot of folks may not realize that, when they get clean water, the air they breathe, we have to have healthy ecosystems and good rangelands and, be managing our wildlife populations properly for that to happen. I've often said if this country can catch on to the idea that there's 7 degrees of separation from anyone in Kevin Bacon, we surely can convince folks that there's
Isn't that
about
6 degrees?
Whatever. That we can convince folks that it's about 3 degrees between what we do in conservation and a personal benefit to them, whether it's going out bird watching, whether it's walking your dog in a park that's been funded through LWCF funds, whether it's having the ability to take a hunter education class, and Brian coming out and coming to your program and going out and trying to harvest deer, elk, and other species. And I think we underestimate the public sometimes. And Tony, it's really it's great to hear you working on that, because I know you can deliver a message and you're a go-getter on this stuff, and I think there's good things coming there.
There is you discussed something called a roadmap to relevancy. Is that's working with the Wildlife Management Institute and some other state agencies through what was the Blue Ribbon Panel for Fish and Wildlife Conservation. Is that correct? Is that something that's coming out soon?
Yeah, probably in the next 6 months we'll see a usable product there, and this has really been about 5 years in the making, from the initial concept idea being put out, and that original recommendation came out of the Blue Ribbon Panel that was assembled by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, the national organization, and it was co-chaired by Bass Pro Shops president, founder Johnny Morris, and former Wyoming Governor Dave Friedenthal. And they made a very specific recommendation to developing a roadmap to relevance, to engage broad constituencies. And it was really about the awareness, the knowledge of conservation, hunters, anglers, what we do, who we are, with the end goal of having a usable product that our organizations, wildlife agencies, federal partners could draw from to help us all achieve our goals.
So I'm gonna pull out then we have to move on from this, but as many hunters have expressed over the years, why would we care? Why would we want more people to know, to get involved? We've been doing this just fine for a long time here, and they're going to step on our toes.
Yeah, I think that is one of the concerns, but there's quite a bit of data, social science data out there, and the nation is trending. And it's different. Some states it's trending faster than others. Certainly in my state of Nevada, we've seen a lot more urbanization, and with that urbanization is a lack of awareness of who we are and what we do. And so, if we don't pay attention to our own relevance, we risk becoming irrelevant, and it goes right back to those the competition with those other programs at our state legislatures, on Capitol Hill. Whether we recognize it or not, our activities, our passions, our pursuits are subject to the acceptance, approval, and sometimes funding of others. And the more awareness and appreciation that we can foster along the way, the more we can safeguard those passions and our traditions.
I sat in on a session earlier this week. Colorado has been doing a fairly deep dive into broadening funding sources for conservation, parks, recreation, and they were telling us that they did some interviews with some mountain bikers and hikers to try to find out things that they would have tolerance, to help support public, paying into a system to help support. and the people had no idea. They kind of knew who Colorado Parks and Wildlife were, but they didn't have any clue about what they did and how that was relevant to what they enjoyed, the mountain biking or the hiking. And so there really is a communications and awareness, a public relations hill to climb for sure for state agencies, state fish and wildlife agencies.
And just I mean, so many people take wildlife for granted, and they don't realize that it's really a byproduct of the efforts of hunters and anglers in so many instances, and just understanding that there are a lot of people in the public that take that for granted and think that, you know, it would be there, you know, regardless, that it doesn't take management is a problem in and of itself. And just helping those people understand that the abundance of wildlife in this country is a consequence of management and conservation by hunters, anglers, conservation organizations like the Mule Deer Foundation and others.
Now, Brian, we're going to shift gears a little bit. I missed you this year at the Deer and Elk Workshop. I actually missed the Nevada. How are your big game doing in Nevada?
So our big game in Nevada are largely doing very well. You know, there's certainly a perception that our mule deer are at levels below what they have been historically. There are parts of our history where we did have much higher, probably double the amount of deer that we have in Nevada right now. But the populations are doing well, especially if anybody that's interested in hunting. We've got, you know, the buck-to-doe ratios are very healthy. We've seen good recruitment. We're getting good moisture right now. A lot of it's coming in the form of snow, which can be a little bit challenging, but it's also been fairly warm, so it's been melting off pretty rapidly. So we're hoping for favorable conditions. Challenge with that, of course, is that with Nevada's ecosystems and some of the changes we've seen historically there, we also run the risk of having an awful lot more cheatgrass on the landscape, which can, again, bring up the concerns for wildfires. Looking at other species, you know, our elk populations are doing well, our antelope populations are doing very well. It's, you know, things are looking pretty favorable in Nevada right now.
Now, some of those challenges you talk about, you're mostly public land state, so you have to have that great coordination with the Forest Service and BLM. But, you know, you guys experienced some big fires over the last few years. What's that done to our habitat?
That's a very good point. And when when I say things are looking favorable, you know, we certainly have, you know, good conditions right now. We've had 2 years in a row where we've had over 1 million acres burn. That has catastrophic effects on sage grouse, on pygmy rabbits, it can have really negative effects on the mule deer. Sagebrush is not something that responds well to fire. If you have fires that occur above 6,000 to 7,000 feet, we often have favorable conditions that follow. But those lower elevation fires, we often wind up replacing sagebrush with cheatgrass. Cheatgrass, of course, is really fire adapted. It's a fast, it comes in rapidly. It's not native. It's something that was introduced, and as a result of that, you wind up changing those landscapes, and especially for those species that are so dependent upon sagebrush ecosystems and communities that, you know, it can be really catastrophic for those.
Yeah.
Tony, I want to just put, you made a comment on either in a conversation or one of your speeches about flying over when there was one of the big fires that you had, and the people near you making a comment, oh, it's just the sagebrush, nothing lives there. That again goes to the relevancy and the people's recognition of the importance, because that's, I mean, clearly not true. There's 300 plus species that depend on those sagebrush systems.
There's over 350 species that rely on that ecosystem, but it is, you know, the flyover country, if you will, and you're exactly right. You know, it's frustrating when people don't recognize the importance of that habitat, in particular to mule deer, but the whole host of other species. And so that's exactly right. That's exactly what we're talking about when we talk about relevance. It's just a broader awareness. We're not trying to take everybody who's an anti-hunter and make them a supporter of hunting. We're not trying to convert everybody to go be a hunter, but just having a broader awareness of conservation species and the habitats on which they depend is going to help us deliver effective conservation.
So one other issue that comes up, and I hesitate to bring this up, but I'm going to because you guys deal with this every day. Wild horse and burros. Free-ranging wild equids or feral equids, I guess, out there that can and I guess do have a drastic effect in certain parts of the range.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. They certainly can have an effect in certain parts of the range. And they're another aspect of the environment that are valued by certain segments of the public. And the challenge is, just with any other species that are actively managed, we can have a certain number of feral horses or wild horses on the landscape, but it's important that those numbers be at a manageable level that doesn't wind up having an impact on other wild species, that doesn't have an effect on our water resources, doesn't have an effect on the landscape and the wild, the scenic areas, the habitat that livestock depend upon in order to be able to be raised, even on human health and safety where collisions occur on highways. And so, yeah, it's a huge issue. I think Nevada in a lot of ways is kind of the epicenter of a lot of those issues because there's so many horses and equids on the landscape within Nevada. If we could manage it within the appropriate management levels that BLM, for instance, has established, we'd be far better off and in a far better place to be able to manage everything the way it would benefit everything.
Well, and the cheatgrass invasions impact that too, obviously, because you have less forage for everything, for the deer, for the horses, for the elk, for the, for the cattle. So when you have a growing population of a feral animal and then these other populations, it's trying to balance that and then having declining forage because of the fires and then the cheatgrass invasions. It's a challenge.
Exactly. That it exacerbates the challenges we have when we have cheatgrass invasions into new areas. Trying to, and most of our livestock producers understand the need to manage grazing ungulates at a level that allow for populations to the habitat to be there to support things. The whole concept of trying to manage rangelands for an acceptable use, and that's something we try to look at with our elk management plans when we're developing our elk harvest recommendations. We cooperate with the land management agencies, the sporting groups, with the producers. We're trying to find an equitable level that we can manage that at, and we lack the tools to be able to do that with the horses. No one disputes that they can be beautiful animals and that they can be, there's certainly a level at which they could be managed for, but it's a real challenge to get the rest of it to operate effectively when we have unmanaged levels.
Yeah, I might just add a little bit of data. Presently, Nevada has more horses than we have feral horses than we have ever had in our history. They continue to build, they continue to reproduce. The holding facilities are at or near capacity. There simply are not an adequate number of viable off-ramps to take horses off the federally administered lands and do something with them. At the same time, we manage livestock according to numbers and season of use. We manage our wild game with population objectives. We have we have appropriate management levels determined for those wild free-roaming horses, but we don't have the tools available to us to manage at those levels. You brought up forage. When we look at how a horse forages relative to how a mule deer forages, a mule deer is a highly selective herbivore taking specific species and specific parts of specific species, where horses are volume eaters. I mean, there's a reason they call them hay burners. They just eat volume. They have a single stomach, just a large fermentation vat. They're called a monogastric fermenter, and they just eat volume. He
sounds like an ex-biologist.
Actually, Steve, I was thinking about the large No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Large fermenter.
Yeah. So they just pack it away, and on average, a horse will eat 10 times the volume of forage that a mule deer will. That's just
and horses graze down. They trim all the way down to the root level, so the regeneration of the forage is harder as well.
Teeth on both sides of the jaw.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And their growth rate is astronomical. While we're still trying to maintain the growth rate on our mule deer populations and some of our antelope populations, right now we're seeing that the doubling rate for our wild horse populations are about every 4 years.
And they live, what, 30 years?
They can live to be quite old.
Probably not in the wild, I'm guessing.
Yeah, not very often 30, but it kind of brings up another point of, things that affect their survival. They certainly are, being big-bodied animals, they certainly have the ability to avoid a lot of predation that smaller-bodied animals like mule deer are not able to avoid.
Well, one of the things I've observed in Wyoming and a couple other states is the territoriality around water holes. Those horses will come in, and that stallion or the lead mare will then not allow any other wildlife or anything else to drink. And in those dry climates, it's pretty important that they get to that water. So.
Yeah, I think that's actually probably the likely greater impact in the Great Basin in Nevada than maybe the forage in the wetter years. Where it's aggressive defense of limited water sources. I mean, we're already really dry. We have an aggressive water development program to augment water for wildlife. But in those natural seeps and streams and bogs where those horses can stand, they aggressively defend it to the detriment of elk, deer, pronghorn.
Well, we hope Congress helps you out because they help with the Wild Horse and Burro Act created some limitations on the ability to manage these equids, and we really hope that you guys work with the BLM and Forest Service to get your numbers because I think our wildlife depends on it. So something happened here in the last year, Brian, and maybe you guys can shed light on why this happened. There appears to be an effort to regulate trail cams through the commission. Tell us a little bit about how that came about. That's a huge tool these days for scouting.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, and this was a concern brought forward by several of our counties, especially counties in some of the drier areas, again with really limited water, and Nevada doesn't have an abundance of water, nor do we have an abundance of trees in certain areas, which makes visibility of animals fairly high, and we were seeing competition on those limited water sources for users of trail cameras. And
I've heard there's water holes that have like 20, 30 trail cams posted on it.
Yeah,
30 plus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take a picture of another camera.
There was a couple issues there where the disturbance of animals as people were coming and going from those cameras, and you can imagine if you had, and we have some pretty compelling photos of 27 cameras on a single tree or in every fence post around a water hole with a camera on it, and so there was a lot of traffic in and out of those areas, and we just felt as that concern was continually brought forward by some of our customers and hunters. The commission was asked to address it. They looked at their authorities and implemented a regulation that would prohibit the use of trail cameras on waters for certain times of the year, again with the intent of providing those animals some relief, those animals the ability to get to and from water. It was completely possible for a hunter to put cameras on all the waters within a management area and conceivably have a photo of every animal in that area. And then, again, you have a scenario where people could sell.
They do real time, right? They're sending a signal that you can sit at home.
That technology does exist. Again, that was addressed in the regulation. But where it becomes really problematic is where those individuals have those photos and they have GPS coordinates of an identified animal and then sell that. And we were seeing businesses established that were selling the locations of animals. And then so there's a couple issues. The hunter ethic piece, and it goes right back to that relevance piece. Right. If we want to have the support for our actions as hunters and anglers, I think we need to act in a responsible and ethical manner.
So one last item, and Tony, I know you need to get going. Most folks don't know Nevada's the most mountainous state in the country. If you would hammer it down flat, it'd be huge, bigger than Alaska. So you get seasonal movements of animals from the Sky Islands down to the Valley Bottoms. Tell us a little bit about what some of the challenges are there, and just so you all know, the Mule Deer Foundation, as we expand our migration initiative, is going to be moving into Nevada to help you guys out with some of these issues. So what are the challenges of managing migration routes, and what do you guys really need help with from a division standpoint so that those animals can do what they need to do?
Well, not only do they move elevationally, but we've got some of the largest long-range movements when you start looking at their ability to move across the landscape, some of it from the north to south standpoint as well. So we've already been working with the Department of Transportation, Nevada Department of Transportation. We've got several migration corridors identified. We've been able to actually implement a number of overpasses over the interstates, for instance. And this, a lot of people look at those and think that they're just a benefit to the animals, but they're also a benefit to the human health and safety because we reduce the number of collisions. We have a reduction in risk to human health because of that. In addition, we've got a number of places, mineral extraction, oil and mineral is something that's a big thing within Nevada. And so trying to understand those movements so that we can work with oil and mineral companies as they're developing their exploration and extraction exercises, we can find ways that we can actually get what we need from to help the U.S. economy and at the same time maintain our migration corridors so that we've got better places, better options so that we can maintain those migrations. Those migrations are incredibly important. They're, especially for mule deer, they follow the same routes, they go to the same places. They need to have those protections. And challenges, again, coming back to the wildfire challenges, if they come back to an area we know where they're going to be, we can look at the really high priority areas and try to look at those for protection and restoration of the habitats, rehabilitation of the habitats in the event of an uncontrolled fire that we didn't expect. Developments of housing. So, one of the challenges that people look at, they don't fully recognize with Nevada. They say, wow, 85 to 86% of the state's, not public, is public. It's not private. Yet you look at where people develop and the first places where people settle, it's going to be those high quality habitats because they're productive. There's water there, and so that's really becomes critical.
Same reason the animals love it?
Yeah,
the humans
exactly.
love it.
Yeah, and just the fact that the animals are there, it adds to the value of our lives. That's why we're attracted to it as well.
True.
Yeah, I might add the first step there, Steve, I think is really delineating those areas, understanding where those areas are, and I know we've had a strong partnership with the Mule Deer Foundation, on the science side of things and projects to treat habitats. And with the advent of, GPS technology and collars, we've really been able to refine these corridors and these stopovers and really having accurate maps is the first step. And then once you know where they are, then you can, kind of dissect it and look at opportunities, whether it be fences or other potential hurdles.
So before we sign off, there was one other thing that you and I were talking yesterday about your new online licensing system. Do you want to give us a quick overview on some of the changes and some of the benefits and some of the things that you've seen out of it?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks for bringing that up, Jody. There's been just a couple quick pieces. License simplification effort 2 years ago at our legislative session went from 27 different license options down to 8. Removed the stamps, combined many of that to simplify that for hunters. Put out a request for proposal, selected a new vendor. The department's using Calcami Enterprises, and we redesigned our online application system. Again, you can do it from a mobile device, from a tablet. It's we think it's simplified. It's come at a significant savings, cost savings for sportsmen, and it has increased capabilities, utilities. And last year, as a all hands on deck to stand it up. This year, we added a whole lot of bells and whistles. So if you haven't been on there yet, feel free. NDOWlicensing.com. Get on there, check it out. And I think people will really be impressed with the added functionality. We've seen a 29% increase in hunting license sales just year-over-year increase.
Are y'all a full price submission, or is it an application fee?
It's an application fee, and you can either choose to purchase a license only if successfully drawn, or if you want to accrue bonus points, a purchase of the license is required.
Great.
Great. Well, thank you for that, because I know that was a big thing for you guys, and it's great to hear that it's rolling out. And obviously there's always a learning curve, particularly from some of your traditional users. But I think from what you've described, it is a significant improvement and will make life easier, which is kind of the goal. It should not be so hard to get a license and to get out and do what you want to do.
It should not be a barrier to participation. Yep.
Yeah. And based on what we're seeing, our perception is that it's better, but based on what we're seeing, we're getting a lot more people playing in the game.
So Brian, more deer, bigger bucks, bigger bulls, right?
We're
and easier to get your license. What's not to like about Nevada?
Yeah, it's always a challenge. We have a limited number of resources, and we have a lot of people that have an interest in it. And so we try to provide an optimal level, and it's something that it's a careful management action.
I've seen some really big bucks come out of Nevada.
Yes, indeed.
So thank you guys very much. I know this is a busy conference. It's the last day. We're all a little brain fried after it, but we really appreciate you carving out.
And in Jody's case, it doesn't take much fry.
True.
Wow.
Yeah, thanks. But thank you very much for your time. So until the next time, this is Jody Stemler.
And I'm Steve Belinda. And if you are in Nevada and get lucky at the tables, please take some of those winnings and give it to Tony in the department so we can have good mule deer and good wildlife there. So thank you, folks, and thank you for Talking Mule Deer.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for Talking Mule Deer with Steve Belinda and Jody Stemler. The Mule Deer Foundation is the only conservation group in North America dedicated to restoring, improving, and protecting mule deer and black-tailed deer and their habitat. MDF is a strong voice for hunters in access, wildlife management, and conservation policy issues. To find out more, visit www.muledeer.org and stay tuned for the next episode of Talkin' Mule Deer.